The wind carried whispers across the Montana plains that morning, rustling through the tall grass like secrets being shared between old friends. Jacob Thornfield stood on his porch, coffee cup steaming in his weathered hands, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. He'd grown accustomed to the solitude after 7 years of living alone on his ranch. But something felt different today, as if the very air held its breath. Waiting at 32, Jacob had the kind of rugged handsomeness that came from honest work under an unforgiving sun. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, premature aging brought on by heartbreak rather than time. The lines around his green eyes spoke of laughter that had long since faded, placed by a quiet resignation that had settled into his bones like winter cold. The lazy tea ranch stretched for miles in every direction, a testament to Jacob's stubborn determination to build something lasting from nothing. Cattle dotted the pastures like dark specks against the golden grass. The barn he'd built with his own hands stood proud against the endless sky. It was a good life, he told himself each morning, a peaceful life. But peaceful and fulfilling were two entirely different things. As he turned to go back inside, a movement on the horizon caught his eye. A lone figure approached on foot, stumbling slightly as if exhausted. Jacob set down his cup and shaded his eyes with his hand, squinting into the distance. The figure was small, moving with the uncertain gait of someone pushed beyond their limits. His heart began to beat faster as the stranger drew nearer. There was something familiar about the way she moved, something that stirred memories he'd buried deep. When she was close enough for him to make out her features, Jacob's breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be, not after all these years. Woman collapsed to her knees just as she reached his porch steps, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. Her dress was torn and dusty from travel, but even in her disheveled state, Jacob would have known her anywhere. Those delicate hands, the graceful curve of her neck, the way she held herself even in exhaustion, it was unmistakably her. "Alina," he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. She looked up then, and their eyes met across the years that had separated them. Hers were the same deep brown he remembered, warm as coffee and just as intoxicating. But now they held a weariness that hadn't been there before, a sadness that made his chest tighten with an old, familiar ache. "Jacob," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the wind. I didn't know where else to go." Without hesitation, he was beside her, his strong arms lifting her gently from the ground. She felt so fragile against his chest, lighter than he remembered, as if the years had worn her down like water on stone. He carried her inside, settling her carefully on the worn leather sofa near the fireplace. "What happened to you?" he asked, kneeling beside her and studying her face with concern. "Where have you been?" Lena closed her eyes, and for a moment Jacob thought she might have fainted. Then she spoke, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I married him, Jacob, just like my father wanted. Lord Richard Pemberton of Charleston." The name fell between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples of old pain across the surface of Jacob's carefully constructed calm. 7 years ago, Lena Castillo had been the daughter of the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties. Don Carlos Castillo had grand plans for his only child. Plans that didn't include a poor cowboy who worked other men's cattle and dreamed of having his own spread someday. When Lord Pemberton had come calling with his fancy clothes and proper English accent, offering marriage and a life of luxury in Charleston society, Don Carlos had seen it as the answer to all his prayers. Jacob remembered that last night as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. He and Alina had met in secret by the old oak tree near the river, the same place they'd shared their first kiss under a canopy of stars. She'd been crying then too, her tears silvery in the moonlight as she told him about her father's ultimatum. "Marry Lord Pemberton, or be disowned and cut off without a penny," she'd whispered against his chest. "He says, if I choose you, he'll make sure you never work on another ranch in this territory. He'll destroy you, Jacob." "Let him try," Jacob had said, fiercely, his arms tightening around her. "We'll leave together, head north to Montana or Wyoming. I'll find work, build us a home. Don't need his money, Elena. We just need each other." But she'd pulled away from him then, shaking her head. "You don't understand. He means it, Jacob. He has the power to ruin you completely. And what kind of life would that be? Always running, always looking over our shoulders. I can't ask you to give up everything for me. You're not asking, he'd said desperately. I'm offering, freely, gladly. I love you, Elena. That has to count for something. She'd kissed him then, long and deep, pouring all her love and regret into that final embrace. When she pulled away, her decision was written in the tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she'd whispered. I'm so sorry, Jacob, but I can't. I won't be responsible for destroying your future. 3 days later, she was gone, married too. Lord Pemberton, in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of 3 counties. Jacob had ridden out that same morning, heading north with nothing but his horse, his saddle, and a heart that felt like it had been carved out of his chest with a dull knife. Now, 7 years later, she was here. Broken and exhausted, seeking refuge in the home he'd built from the ashes of their lost love. Tell me what happened, he said gently, settling into the chair across from her. Take your time. Lena drew a shuddering breath, her hands trembling. As she smoothed her torn skirt, it wasn't what he seemed, Jacob. Lord Pemberton, he was cruel, cold. The wealth, the position in society, was all built on lies and other people's suffering. He had gambling debts, secret business dealings, with unsavory men, and when he drank, she touched her cheek unconsciously, and Jacob's jaw clenched as he noticed the faint yellow bruise along her jawline. Did he hurt you? The words came out low and dangerous, and Alina looked up sharply at the tone. Said quickly, I left him. 3 months ago, I gathered what courage I had left, and I ran. I've been traveling ever since, working my way west. I sold my jewelry, my fine dresses, everything. I wanted to come home, Jacob. Back to where I felt safe. Back to me, he finished quietly. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, all the years between them seemed to dissolve. She was still the girl he'd fallen in love with under the Texas stars, and he was still the man who would have given up everything for her smile. But they weren't the same people they'd been 7 years ago. Life had changed them both, carved. New lines on their faces and deeper understanding in their hearts. The question now was whether what they'd once shared could survive the weight of all that had happened since. I know I have no right to be here, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I hurt you terribly when I left, but I had nowhere else to turn, and I never stopped thinking about you, Jacob. Not once in all these years. Jacob stood abruptly, walking to the window and staring out at the land he'd built his new life upon. His hands were clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to go to her, to pull her into his arms and promise that everything would be all right. But he'd learned caution the hard way, and the scars from their first parting ran deep. You made your choice, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. You chose security over love, your father's approval over our future. I can't fault you for it. It was probably the smart thing to do. But I can't pretend it didn't nearly destroy me. I know, she whispered. I know. And I'm sorry. I've regretted it every day since. But Jacob, I was 19 years old and terrified. My father made it clear that choosing you meant choosing poverty and disgrace, not just for me, but for you too. I thought, I thought I was protecting you. Turned back to face her, and she saw the pain in his green eyes that matched her own. Protecting me? Lena, when you left, I lost everything that mattered. Do you know what these past 7 years have been like? Every sunrise reminded me of the morning you said goodbye. Every sunset made me think of the life we should have had together. I built this ranch with my bare hands, acre by acre, hoping that someday you might. That maybe if I proved I could provide for you, His voice broke, and he turned away again, ashamed of the emotion that threatened to spill over. Alina rose from the sofa on unsteady legs, crossing the room to stand behind him. Shh, she said softly, her hand hovering just inches from his broad shoulder. Look at me, please. He turned slowly, and what she saw in his face made her heart shatter all over again. Love and pain warred in his expression, hope and fear dancing together in the depths of his eyes. I never married him for love, she said, her voice gaining strength. Every night I lay beside him, I dreamed of you. Every morning I woke up wishing I was here, in your arms, in the home we should have built together. I made a terrible mistake, Jacob. The worst mistake of my life. But I'm here now, and I'm free. If there's any part of you that still loves me, any chance that we could. Don't, he said sharply, stepping back from her. Don't ask me that, not yet. I need time to think, Elena, to figure out what this means. The hurt that flashed across her face was like a knife to his heart, but he forced himself to stay strong. 7 years of learning to live without her couldn't be erased in a single conversation, no matter how much he wanted to believe in second chances. Of course, she said quietly, wrapping her arms around herself. I understand, Il. I'll find somewhere else to go.
Ow.
I shouldn't have come here. It wasn't fair to you.
Ow.
Jacob said quickly, hating himself for the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. You're not going anywhere. Not like this. Not when you're hurt and exhausted. You can stay in the guest room, at least until you're strong enough to travel. We'll figure out the rest later. Relief flooded her features and she nodded gratefully. Thank you, Jacob. You're kinder than I deserve. He showed her to the small bedroom at the back of the house, bringing her fresh water and some of his clothes to change into since she had no luggage. As she closed the door behind her, Jacob leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, trying to steady his racing heart. She was here. After 7 years of dreaming about her, missing her, cursing her name, in his darkest moments, Elena was actually here. And despite everything, despite the pain and betrayal and years of loneliness, his heart was singing with a joy he thought was lost forever. But joy was dangerous. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford, not until he knew for certain that she wouldn't disappear again, leaving him to pick up the pieces of his shattered world. The next few days passed in a strange, careful dance around each other. Elena helped with small tasks around the house, cooking meals and mending clothes with the domestic skills she'd never had a chance to use during her marriage to Lord Pemberton. Jacob went about his usual ranch work, but found himself stealing glances at her throughout the day, marveling at how right she looked in his kitchen, how perfectly she seemed to fit into the life he'd built. They talked, carefully at first, then with growing ease as they rediscovered the connection that had never truly died. Elena told him about her years in Charleston, suffocating society, parties, and empty conversations, the growing realization that she'd traded her soul for security. Jacob spoke of building the ranch, the long winter nights when he'd wondered if she ever thought of him. The way he'd channeled his heartbreak into hard work until exhaustion was the only thing that let him sleep. I used to imagine you here, Elena said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. When Charleston felt like a cage and I couldn't breathe, I'd close my eyes and picture this you. And me, sitting together at the end of the day, watching our children play in the yard. Jacob's hands tightened on his coffee cup. Children, she blushed, but didn't look away. We talked about having children once. Do you remember? You said you wanted a daughter with my eyes and a son who could ride before he could walk. I remember, Jacob said quietly. I remember everything, Elena. Every word, every kiss, every promise we made. That's part of the problem. It doesn't have to be a problem, she said, turning to face him fully. We could still have all of that, Jacob. We're not too old, not to set in our ways. We could start over, build the life we should have had from the beginning. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dying light. She was more beautiful now than she'd been at 19, her features refined by experience and softened by suffering into something that took his breath away. But beauty had never been the issue between them. What happens when your father finds out you're here? He asked finally. What happens when Lord Pemberton comes looking for his wife? My father disowned me the day I left Charleston, Elena said firmly. Yes? He sent word through his lawyers that I was no longer his daughter, that his will had been changed. As for Pemberton, I filed for divorce before I left. It won't be final 4 months yet, but I made it clear I was never coming back. Divorce is a scandal, Elena. You know that? It'll follow you wherever you go. She lifted her chin with the stubborn pride he remembered so well. Let it. I'd rather be a divorced woman living honestly than a married woman living a lie. I don't care what society thinks anymore, Jacob. I only care what you think. Jacob lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in his mind. 3 days she'd been here, and already his carefully ordered world was spinning off its axis. The walls he'd built around his heart were crumbling, brick by brick, under the gentle assault of her presence. But he was afraid, terrified, if he was honest. Because losing her once had nearly killed him, and he wasn't sure he was strong enough to survive it again. The answer came to him at dawn. When he found her in the kitchen making breakfast, humming softly to herself as she worked. She'd braided her long hair back and was wearing one of his old shirts over her skirt, looking so much like the girl he'd fallen in love with that his heart clenched with recognition. "Alina," he said, and something in his voice made her turn. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, cupping her face in his hands and searching her eyes for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. What he found there was love pure, unwavering, and as strong as it had ever been. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "Dam, dam, da, 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 da. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. I tried to hate you, tried to forget you, tried to convince myself I was better off without you. But I was lying to myself, Alina. You're the other half of my soul, and I've been walking around incomplete for 7 years." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she reached up to cover his hands with hers. "Jacob, let me finish," he said urgently. "Oh, I'm scared. I'm terrified that you'll change your mind again, that something will happen to take you away from me. I'd rather have 1 day of real happiness with you than a lifetime of safety without you. If you're willing to take a chance on us again, if you really mean it this time, then I'm yours. I've always been yours. I mean it," she whispered fiercely. "I'll never leave you again, Jacob. I swear it on my mother's grave, on everything I hold sacred. I'm home, and I'm never leaving." He kissed her then, soft and sweet at first, then with growing passion as 7 years of longing poured out between them. She tasted like tears and coffee and the promise of forever, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Me," he said against her lips. "As soon as your divorce is final, marry me. I don't care about the scandal or what people will say. I just want you to be my wife." "Yes," she breathed, laughing through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." But their joy was short-lived. 2 weeks later, as Alina was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, a dust cloud on the horizon announced visitors. Jacob stepped out onto the porch, his hand automatically going to the gun at his hip as he recognized the riders approaching. Don Carlos Castillo rode at the front of the group, his black horse prancing with barely contained energy. Behind him came 4 of his best men, all armed and looking grim. At his side rode a stranger, well-dressed man with pale skin and cold blue eyes that could only belong to Lord Richard Pemberton, Lena. Jacob called sharply, and she appeared around the corner of the house, her face going white as she saw who was approaching. "My father," she whispered, her hands clutching the laundry basket so tightly her knuckles went white. "And Richard." "Ow." "God, Jacob, they've found me." "Get inside," Jacob said firmly, never taking his eyes off the approaching riders. "Lock the door, and don't come out no matter what happens." "I won't hide from them," Alina said, moving to stand beside him on the porch. "Not anymore." The riders pulled up in front of the house in a cloud of dust, and Don Carlos dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. At 65, he was still an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered with steel-gray hair and eyes like winter storms. "Alina," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You will come home with me now. This foolishness has gone on long enough." "This is my home, Papa," Alina said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear. Jacob could sense radiating from her. "And I'm not going anywhere." Lord Pemberton dismounted as well, and Jacob took an instant dislike to the man. He was handsome in a cold, aristocratic way. But there was something cruel in his pale eyes, something that spoke of a man who enjoyed having power over others. "My dear wife," Pemberton said, his English accent making the words sound like an age. "Insult. You've led me quite a chase. But the game is over now. You belong to me legally and morally, and I've come to take you home." "I don't belong to anyone," Alina said, lifting her chin defiantly. "And I filed for divorce, Richard. You know I'm never coming back to you. Divorce, Don Carlos spat, his face darkening with rage. You shame our family name with such talk? Daughter, a Castile woman does not abandon her husband, no matter what her personal feelings might be. Castile woman doesn't deserve to be beaten and humiliated either, Elena shot back, and Jacob saw red at the confirmation of what he'd suspected. You laid hands on her, he said, his voice deadly quiet as he stepped protectively in front of Elena. Pemberton's smile was thin and ugly. I discipline my wife as I see fit, cowboy. It's none of your concern. Everything about Elena is my concern, Jacob replied, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. She's under my protection now. You have no legal claim to her, Don Carlos said coldly. She is still married, still bound by the vows she took. And you, Thornfield, are nothing but a poor cowboy with delusions of grandeur. That poor cowboy owns more land than you do now, old man, Jacob said with grim satisfaction. The Lazy T Ranch stretches for 15,000 acres in every direction. I built something from nothing while your daughter was trapped in a loveless marriage. It doesn't matter what you've built, Pemberton said dismissively. Elena is my wife, and she's coming home with me. The law is on my side. The law might be, Jacob said, his voice carrying the promise of violence. But I am too. And I promise you, Lord Pemberton, if you try to take her against her will, you'll find out just how quickly things can change out here. The tension stretched. Taut between them, 5 armed men facing off against one, with Elena caught in the middle. Jacob's men were out checking cattle, too far away to be of help if shooting started, but he'd faced worse odds before, and he'd be damned if he'd let them take Elena without a fight. Papa, Elena said suddenly, stepping around Jacob to face her father directly. Look at me. Really look at me. When I left here 7 years ago, I was dying inside but trying to do what you thought was best. When I married Richard, I was already broken. These past few weeks with Jacob are the first time I've felt alive in years. Don't you want your daughter to be happy? For just a moment, something flickered in Don Carlos's hard eyes. Love, perhaps, or regret. But it was quickly buried. Under years of pride and stubborn tradition, happiness is a luxury, he said firmly. Duty and honor are what matter. You took vows, Elena, sacred vows before God and man. I will not allow you to break them for the sake of a childhood infatuation. It's not infatuation, Elena said desperately. I love him, Papa. I've always loved him. Oh, surely that has to count for something. Love is fleeting, Pemberton said coldly. Legal marriage is not. You are my wife, Elena, and you will remain so until death parts us. I've been more than patient with your little rebellion, but it ends now. He gestured to the men behind him, and they began to dismount, hands moving toward their weapons. Jacob's own hand tightened on his gun, calculating odds and angles, preparing for the fight that seemed inevitable. But Elena stepped forward, placing herself between the two groups of men. Stop, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Like a blade, all of you, just stop. She turned to face Pemberton, her shoulders squared and her head held high. Richard, I know you have the law on your side. I know you could probably force me to come back with you, at least temporarily. But ask yourself this. Do you really want a wife who despises you? Do you want to spend the rest of your life married to a woman who will never willingly share your bed, who will fight you at every turn, who will make your life as miserable as you've made hers? Pemberton's face darkened, but she continued before he could speak. Because that's what you'll get if you take me back to Charleston. Never stop trying to escape. Never stop fighting for my freedom. I'll make you the laughingstock of Charleston. Society. The man who has to keep his wife locked up because she'd rather die than be with him. You're bluffing, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You know me, Richard. Have I ever backed down from a fight? Have I ever failed to follow through on a threat? Take me back, and I promise you'll regret it for the rest of your life. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the whisper of wind through the grass and the distant lowing of cattle. Jacob watched Elena with a mixture of admiration and terror, knowing that she was gambling everything on her ability to face down two of the most powerful men in her life. Finally, Pemberton spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. What do you want?
Ah!
Let me go, Elena said simply. Grant me the divorce I've asked for. Walk away and never look back. In return, I'll give you a clean break, no scandal. No messy court proceedings. No public humiliation. I'll disappear from Charleston society completely, and you can tell whatever. Story you like about why your wife is no longer with you? And if I refuse, Elena's smile turned sharp as a blade, then I'll fight you with everything I have. I'll hire the best lawyers, drag every sordid detail of our marriage into the public eye, and make sure everyone in Charleston knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Your gambling debts, your cruelty, your business dealings with criminal Saul. Of it will come out. Pemberton's face went white, and Jacob realized that Elena had just played her trump card. Whatever secrets she knew about her husband, they were damaging enough to make him think twice about forcing her return. You forget yourself, Elena, Don Carlos said sharply. You speak as if you have choices in this matter. But I am still your father, and I will not allow you to destroy our family's reputation with this scandal. Lena turned to face him, and Jacob saw tears glittering in her eyes. But her voice remained steady. Papa, I will always be your daughter, no matter what happens here today. But I am also a grown woman who has the right to choose her own path. You taught me to be strong, to stand up for what I believe in. Don't punish me now for being the woman you raised me to be. I raised you to be honorable, Don Carlos said, but his voice had lost some of its steel. To keep your word, to uphold your commitments. And I tried, Elena said, her voice breaking slightly. God knows I tried, Papa. I spent 7 years trying to be the dutiful wife, trying to make a marriage work with a man who saw me as property rather than a partner. I kept my vows even when he broke his, even when he raised his hand to me, even when every day felt like slow death. But I can't do it anymore. I won't do it anymore. She stepped closer to her father, reaching out to touch his arm. Think I'm being selfish, but what would you have done if someone had treated Mama the way Richard treated me? Would you have told her to stay, to endure it for the sake of honor? Don Carlos flinched as if she'd struck him, and Jacob saw the moment. When the old man's certainty began to crack, Elena's mother had been the love of his life, and the comparison hit him where he was most vulnerable. That's different, he said, but the words lacked conviction. She's not different at all, Elena said gently. Love is love, Papa, in marriage. Without love, without respect, without basic human kindness, that's not honor. That's just prolonged suffering disguised as duty. For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other, years of love and disappointment and misunderstanding, passing between them. Finally, Don Carlos stepped back, his shoulders sagging slightly. You are no longer my daughter, he said, but the words sounded hollow, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as her. If you stay here, if you pursue this path, you are dead to me. Elena's face crumpled for just a moment before she pulled herself together. I'm sorry you feel that way, Papa, but I'd rather be dead to you and alive to myself than the other way around. Don Carlos turned to his men without another word, mounting his horse with the stiff pride of a man who refused to show weakness. We're leaving, he said curtly, but Pemberton wasn't finished. This isn't over, Elena, he said, his voice thick with venom. I'll never grant you a divorce. Never. You can stay here and play house with your cowboy, but you'll always be my wife. And someday, when you least expect it, I'll come back for what's mine. If you ever set foot on my land again, Jacob said quietly, his hand moving to rest on his gun, I'll kill you. That's not a threat, Pemberton. That's a promise. The two men stared at each other for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then Pemberton smiled a cold, cruel expression that made Jacob's skin crawl. We'll see, he said simply, then mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Don Carlos followed, his men falling in behind him. At the edge of the property, he stopped and turned back, his eyes finding Elena one last time. For just a moment, his stern mask slipped, and Jacob saw the pain of a father who loved his daughter but couldn't understand her choices. Then he was gone, leaving only dust and the promise of future trouble in his wake. Elena collapsed against Jacob as soon as they were out of sight, her knees buckling as the adrenaline that had sustained her finally gave way. He caught her easily, holding her close as she sobbed against his chest. It's over, he murmured into her hair. They're gone, and you're safe. But for how long? She asked, pulling back to look at him with eyes red from crying. Richard meant what he said, Jacob. He'll never let me go willingly. And my father, I've lost him forever. Maybe not forever, Jacob said gently, wiping the tears from her cheeks. Time has a way of healing even the deepest wounds. And as for Pemberton, let him come. This is our home, Elena, our land, and I'll defend it to end you with my life if necessary. Ah, she kissed him then, fierce and desperate, pouring all her love, and fear and hope into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I meant what I said, she whispered against his lips. I'll never leave you again, Jacob. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. He agreed and sealed the promise with another kiss. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Jacob's life, despite the shadow of Lord Pemberton's threat hanging over them. Lena threw herself into ranch life with the enthusiasm of a woman finally free to be herself. Ride the range, to help with the cattle, to shoot a rifle with deadly accuracy. She turned the house into a real home, filling it with laughter and love and the thousand small intimacies of a life shared. They were married on a crisp October morning by the circuit preacher, with Jacob's ranch hands as witnesses and the vast Montana sky as their cathedral. Elena wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, and Jacob had never seen anything more beautiful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her with 7 years of pent-up longing, and Elena kissed him back with a joy that lit up her entire face. Finally, she whispered against his lips, and he knew exactly what she meant. That winter brought news that Lord Pemberton had died in a riding
accident.
Back in Charleston, thrown from his horse during a fox hunt and breaking his neck.
Elena
Received the news with relief rather than grief, and Jacob couldn't say he was sorry to hear of the man's passing. It's truly over now, Elena said as they sat by the fire that evening, her head resting on Jacob's shoulder. We're free to be happy without looking over our shoulders. Spring brought another surprise word that Don Carlos was ill, gravely ill, and asking for his daughter. Elena struggled with the decision for days, torn between her love for her father and the memory of his harsh rejection. I have to go to him, she finally decided. I can't let him die thinking I hate him, and we'll go together, Jacob said simply. I won't let you face this alone. They arrived in Texas to find Don Carlos. On his deathbed, his once powerful frame reduced to skin and bones by the cancer eating away at him. But his eyes were still sharp, still proud, and they fixed on Elena the moment she entered his room.
Mia, he whispered,
the endearment falling from his lips like a benediction. You came. Of course I came, Papa, Elena said, tears streaming down her face as she knelt beside his bed and took his hand. I could never stay away when you needed me. I was wrong, he said, his voice barely audible. Wrong to turn my back on you, wrong to value pride over love. Can you forgive a foolish old man? There's nothing to forgive, Elena said, squeezing his hand gently. I love you, Papa. I always have. Don Carlos turned his eyes to Jacob, who stood quietly in the doorway. You, he said, and Jacob stepped forward. Sir, take care of her, the old man said, his voice gaining strength. Love her the way she deserves to be loved. Make her happy. Every day for the rest of my life, Jacob promised solemnly. Don Carlos smiled then, the first genuine smile Jacob had ever seen from him. Then you have my blessing, both of you. I should have given it years ago. He died peacefully that night, Elena's hand in his, finally at peace with his daughter's choice. 2 years later, Elena stood on the porch of their home, watching Jacob teach their son to ride his first pony. Little Carlos, named for his grandfather, was fearless at 3 years old, laughing with delight as the gentle mare walked in slow circles around the corral. Again, Papa, the boy called out, his dark hair catching the sunlight. Again, Lena smiled, her hand resting on the swell of her belly where their second child grew. Life had a way of coming full circle, she reflected. The dreams she and Jacob had shared as young lovers had finally come true, seasoned by hardship and made sweeter by the knowledge of how easily they could have been lost. Mrs. Thornfield, a voice said behind her, and she turned to see one of the ranch hands approaching with his hat in his hands. There's a rider coming up the road. Looks like he might have news. Alina shaded her eyes with her hand, squinting into the distance. A lone horseman approached at an easy pace, and as he drew nearer, she recognized him as the town's telegraph operator. "Jacob," she called, and her husband looked up from the corral, immediately alert to the concern in her voice. He lifted Carlos from the pony and set him safely on the ground before striding over to join her. "What is it?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Telegraph for you, Mr. Thornfield," the operator said as he dismounted, pulling a folded paper from his saddlebag. "Came in this morning from back east." Jacob took the telegram with a frown, unfolding it carefully. As he read, Alina watched his expression change from curiosity to surprise to something that looked almost like wonder. "What does it say?" "What do you thought she?" asked softly. Jacob looked up at her, his green eyes bright with amazement. "It's from a lawyer in Charleston. Apparently Lord Pemberton had no legitimate heirs, and his estate has been tied up in court for 2 years. They've finally settled everything," and he paused, shaking his head as if he couldn't quite believe what he was reading. "Alina, he left you everything. His entire fortune, the house, the investments, everything. Oh, you're a wealthy woman." Alina stared at him in shock, then began to laugh, not with joy, but with the bitter irony of it all. "After everything he put me through, after threatening to never let me go, he gives me his money when he's dead? I don't want it, Jacob, not a penny of it." "The telegram says it's worth over $200,000, Jacob said quietly. "That's more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. "I don't care if it's $2 million, Alina said firmly. "Don't take blood money from that man. We have everything we need right here, our land, our children, our love. What more could we possibly want?" Jacob smiled, pulling her closer. "Nothing," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Absolutely nothing. But Alina, think about what good that money could do. We could build a school for the children in town, help struggling families get back on their feet, maybe even start a hospital. You could turn his legacy of cruelty into something beautiful." Lena considered this, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her growing belly. Their second child would be born in the spring, and she wanted them to grow up in a world where kindness mattered more than wealth, where love was valued over power. "A school," she said slowly, "maybe a home for women who need to escape bad situations like I did. Somewhere they could go to be safe while they figured out what to do next." "The Alina Thornfield Home for Women?" Jacob suggested with a smile. "It has a nice ring to it." "No," Alina said, shaking her head. "Not the Alina Thornfield Home, the Second Chance Home, because everyone deserves a second chance at happiness." 3 years later, the Second Chance Home opened its doors in the town of Cedar Falls. 30 miles south of the Lazy T Ranch, it was a beautiful building, constructed with Pemberton's money but built with love and hope. Women from across the territory came seeking refuge from bad marriages, violent husbands, or simply the crushing weight of lives that had gone wrong. Alina visited once a month, her children in tow, bringing supplies and offering encouragement to the women who reminded her so much of herself 7 years earlier. She would tell them her story, how she'd made the wrong choice out of fear, how she'd found the courage to leave when staying became impossible, how love had given her the strength to start over. "The hardest part isn't leaving," she would tell them as they sat in the home's comfortable parlor, little Carlos playing quietly at her feet while baby Maria slept in her arms. "The hardest part is believing you deserve better. But you do. You all do. And somewhere out there is the life you're meant to live, the love you're meant to have. Don't give up on it." Jacob would watch her during these visits, marveling at the woman she'd become. The frightened girl who'd knelt at his door 4 years ago had transformed into a beacon of hope for others, turning her own pain into a source of healing for women who walked the same difficult path she'd traveled one evening in late summer. As they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Lena turned to him with a smile that still had the power to stop his heart. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The years we lost, the pain we went through to get here?" Jacob considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked something important. Their children played in the yard before them, Carlos, now 6 and fearless as ever, and Maria, 3 years old and already showing signs of her mother's stubborn streak, baby Thomas slept peacefully in Elena's arms. Born just 2 months earlier with his father's green eyes and his mother's gentle spirit. "I regret the pain," he said finally. "I regret that we had to suffer to learn what we know now, but regret the journey that brought us here. Never. Every scar, every tear, every lonely night all led us to this moment, to this life, to these children. How could I regret anything that gave us this?" Alina leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "I love you, Jacob Thornfield. More than I loved you when we were young and foolish, more than I thought it was possible to love another human being." "And I love you, Alina Thornfield," he replied, using the name that still thrilled him every time he said it. "I love your courage, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to give up on what matters. I love the mother you've become, the woman you've always been underneath all the fear and doubt." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jacob reflected on the strange turns life could take 7 years ago.